looking at the syllabus, so much of this project seems to be about showing our leadership skills and what we learned in this course by being ourselves. And so to those ends, I'm not going to beat you up with a bunch of terminology and quotes from the book. I think at this point, having done all the coursework, that it's more important to show how we've put this into practical use. And so looking at the syllabus for this project, the first question was, what were you willing to risk? And I enjoy telling this story because when we first were first appointed out here, we risked an awful lot coming out here. My wife and I really didn't want to come, to be honest. I got a call from the district superintendent that said he was going to appoint me to some place called Westview, Kentucky. And of course, my first question was, well, how far is that from campus? And when he told me it was 2 hours away, I immediately decided, no, that's probably not for me. But since I respected him, I promised him that I'd go out and check out this place. And for us to be able to come out here, we owned a house in Lexington. My wife had a good job. We had a lot of good friends there. We had a great church. And so just even coming out here to talk to the people was a huge risk for us. And I did eventually take the appointment, which is obvious because I'm here at Westview right now. But we gave up everything to come here, and I will be discussing in a few seconds why that was. But we truly left everything behind to follow God and to be where we felt that He was leading us. So much of leadership, as I've talked about so many times, especially in our posts, and I've probably driven my classmates nuts, is this idea of authenticity, of being that person that we claim to be. And I feel like when we came out here, it really was a matter of me being me, because upon entering this church, just a scant 20 feet away from where we are now, I walked into this sanctuary for my first meeting with the PPR with no clue that there was going to be anyone in here with us. And as I stepped through that door with the district superintendent, the PPR chair, which is a 87-year-old woman, was sitting there. And when we stepped through the door, me being me, 6'1", 240, long hair, tattoos. Of course, you couldn't see my tattoos that day. When we stepped through the door, this little old lady looked up at me and goes, "Oh my gosh." And at that moment, I had pretty well decided this wasn't going to work. 2 hours away from home, selling our house, my wife quitting her job, this probably wasn't going to work. But as we came in there and listened to the people, we started to feel a little better about it. Not enough to decide we were going to come here, but I began to feel a connection with these people. And so when I returned back to campus at Asbury the following day, my good friend, we were goofing around over at the college, and he was asking me, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I really don't feel like I'm going to take it. I feel like they're sending me out to Nineveh. And he was kind of laughing at me. And I had no sooner said that than he turns around and punches me in the arm and says, "Look." And I turned around, and there in that little U-Drive at Asbury University was a van that said the Church of Nineveh. And so I looked at him, I go, I guess God has spoke. I feel like there's probably a whale burrowing up through the ground getting ready to swallow me if I don't go. And so that was a part of me being me, listening to God. But I'm also a very stubborn, very passionate person, and I kept thinking back to that first introduction to my PPR chair and her reaction to me. And rather than being dissuaded by it, I felt a real need to come in and try to win this church over, to show them that not every Christian looks the same, that some of us are a little bit different, and that there is beauty in that perhaps we could do something completely different here. And so in coming here, I played, I think, to my strengths. Through my PSDA, you're well aware of my story. And so that first Sunday, I gave my testimony and why my hair is long, to cover up scars, and what my family and I had been through. And that first Sunday, in doing that and making myself vulnerable, being authentic, they were able to see me for who I was and what was inside. And this is the point where I'm going to begin to talk about my leadership model that I wrote in the Leadership of Jesus project. Because that first Sunday was so important in establishing my authenticity as a person and my ability to be able to shepherd these people. Before discussing my leadership model, I think it's important to lay out the challenges here. Now, obviously, we already talked about one with my PPR chair, the impression that they had of this long-haired pastor, which was fixed and hopefully remedied there on that first Sunday. But there were challenges inherent to being out here in Westview, Kentucky, and in Breckinridge County. It's in the middle of nowhere. And these two churches that I was assigned to are very isolated. They don't have a lot of exposure to the broader world, and so the way church is done here is kind of a watered down version of probably what they've done for many, many years. And through the years, since they've never really been challenged because they've had a series of student pastors, and I'm sorry to say most times they come out here with no concern for the churches other than doing their time, graduating school, and moving on to bigger and better things. They were never challenged. And so church for them was just merely showing up on Sundays, visiting with one another, and getting out of here as quickly as possible. And so that presented a lot of challenges in and of itself. It was a matter of truly changing the culture. But what made me realize that I had to do that was before I came out here, the pastor that was here before me, I called him and I asked him, well, what's the general mood of the people? And his response was, well, they're pretty well resigned to get whatever they get and they'll deal with it. Well, I kind of took that as a challenge. They weren't just getting anybody. They weren't just getting some student that was going to bide their time here. They were going to get somebody that was truly going to make a difference, not to pad my resume, but rather to the glory of God. And that was something that was really important to me. And so as we came out here, it was paramount to change the culture, to let them see that there were things in our faith to be excited about, things that were being pushed aside just for the sake of them having never been pushed and having never been challenged in their faith. And so these are the challenges that we faced as we came out here and things that we went after head on. Now, the leadership model that I used was the 4-step model that I come up with for the leadership project of Jesus. And the first step of that was transformation. And the idea was that we have to be transformed from the inside before we can ever hope of transforming others. And that inner transformation is something so basic to our faith, but so often overlooked, that we oftentimes see Christians that claim to be Christians, but their behavior is no different than it was the day before that they were saved. And so we're lacking in that inner transformation, and this is especially important in leaders, that we're able to articulate, that we're able to show that inner transformation and to be able to bring that out in others. And an important part of that as a leader in this church and in trying to instill my leadership model was waking up the churches. These churches had a very surface level faith when I got here. They had never been challenged to go deeper, to look outside themselves and to look outside this community. And we have a very powerful tool in the pulpit. And oftentimes as pastors, I think sometimes we overlook how important the pulpit is. Yes, it's the one time during the week when we're up in front of our congregation, and it seems to be the main role of the pastor to be in the pulpit. But oftentimes we rush through our week. We will throw together a sermon at the last minute just so we have something to offer our people. Instead of taking our time and going back before God and being in constant contact with God and saying, God, please help. Please give me the word. Show me the way so I can be your voice for these people. And so that was an important part of introducing that transformation here. The first step of my model was laying that foundation in the people through the pulpit and challenging them and asking them to go deeper and compelling them, saying, hey, there's something more here. A big part of that, beyond the pulpit, was our teaching. When we first came here, our Bible study was, I think, 6 people. And that's what we had each week if we were lucky. And I inherited a study when we got here. And after I was able to institute my own, which I wrote the entire curriculum for, it was a study of Revelation, our Bible study went from 6 people to 40. And that study was powerful in the sense that we were able to compel people to look outside themselves and at the broader world. And I oftentimes use Scripture that we could look at the outside world. And I challenge them, especially in the book of Revelation, because we get all kinds of crazy ideas about that book. And once I had established my own leadership with these people, I had the authority through the Scripture and the Holy Spirit and their trust to be able to take on a difficult book like that with them and to dispel some of these crazy notions that we've picked up with stuff like Left Behind. And so right here is an example of what we did on Wednesday nights. Now the clip that you're going to see was in the midst of our Revelation study. But as I said, I pulled in the broader world so that they could see what goes on outside of our little bubble here. And I'd actually been to Eastern Kentucky University to listen to Richard Dawkins, and I had been telling them that I was going to go to this for a couple weeks. And so the clip that you're going to see after this is a recap and why it was important for me to go and why what we're doing is so important. Before we jump into this, I figured this would be a good opportunity. It actually, I think, has something to do with what we're doing here. I don't remember, probably 2 weeks ago, that I said I was going to go see the neo-atheist over at Eastern Kentucky, Richard Dawkins. And I did end up going to see him. And what I wanted to talk about just briefly is how important what we're doing is. I know the book of Revelation, unlike most books in the Bible, the book of Revelation, you really need a lot of tools to be able to get through it, and it's unique in that sense. But the rest of the Bible is not quite as difficult, I think, as most of us know. But I hope through this study we've learned that there's a lot of tools out there to help us understand the Word, that help us to come to a deeper understanding, a fuller understanding, because I think it's vital. Dr. Dawkins was fairly engaging. He didn't really say anything too off the wall. He was there peddling a children's book, by the way, that teach children to reject God. And this guy, he's probably in his 60s. He's a world-renowned biologist. He's from Britain. Very kind old man, but he sure hates God. And I don't really want to talk about him so much as what I saw there and why it's important that we know what we believe. When we got to Eastern Kentucky, there wasn't a parking place there at the campus anywhere. I had to park almost 2 miles away and walk. They had started lining up in the amphitheater at 11 o'clock in the morning to hear him. I think the amphitheater, seated about 2,500. It was packed. We got kicked out of there. We tried to sneak in. Surprising no one. And we ended up, they had 3 satellite rooms set up where you could watch the debate or watch him speak. And the one we were in probably seated 150, 200 people. It was slam packed. And I've got to think the rest of them were. But what struck me wasn't so much what Dawkins had to say, because at this point I was more surprised that he wasn't more vitriolic than he was. What was surprising is that the crowd was predominantly made up of college kids. There was a fair amount of older people there. I'd say you saw a lot of young people, and a lot of people I'd say were middle-aged. What was shocking was the raucous applause this guy would get with everything that he said. These people were there for him. And his intent is to tell you why your faith is stupid. And there's no other way to put it, because this guy condescends to Christians. And they're very good at what they do. And what scares me is you have these 18 and 19-year-old kids, the future of our country, of our world, that go off to college that don't have a good foundation in this book, because let's face it, most Christians don't have a good foundation in this book. They go off to college, they don't know what they believe, and here's this world-renowned scholar in front of them that's making them laugh, that's engaging them, and is showing them why Christianity is stupid, and they're eating it up. On the way in, I was stopping and talking to everybody I could find, which is just kind of my nature. And as you can see, I kind of wear my faith on my sleeve. There's no way to get around it. And so people were shocked. Well, why are you here? And I talked to one young couple that were very articulate, very nicely dressed. And, I told them that I respected Dr. Dawkins and I wanted to hear what he had to say, because I think he points out a lot of stuff that the church needs to address. And they were kind of shocked at that. And so as I talked to them, I was like, well, have you read his book, The God Delusion, which is his big book? We've never read anything that he's written. And I go, but you're a fan, right? Oh yeah, we're huge fans. And I'm like, well, how can you be a fan of his? And their response was, he doesn't believe in God and he hates church. Now, this couple was a very nice young couple. This is what's out there. Now, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but you all would have probably never dreamed you'd have a long-haired tattooed pastor. So you never know what's going to come through your door. And it's very important. That's right. It's very important that we know what we believe and why we believe it, and that we can articulate this book in such a way that when somebody like this comes up to us, or better yet, if they come up to somebody in front of us and start trying to destroy their faith, we can step in and say, no, now listen to this side, and be able to do it intelligently. The second step of my model was modeling. And this, as I said in my paper, I consider the outer manifestation of the inner transformation. This is what we see just permeating through our every pore. I often use the term in our discussions in class, the epiphanic presence of Christ, which is simply Christ's light within us, the evidence of that inner transformation, just pouring out from us in such a way that the world looks at us and knows, hey, there's something different about that person. And so it's important for us as leaders that we're able to model this to our people so that they know what it looks like and they know that these things are possible. And through these things, they begin to see how this transformation within them, how it should be manifesting outside of them. And this was a huge step for this church, well, both churches. And that's when we truly began to see these places catching on fire and growing, because both these little churches experienced massive growth right in the first 6 months. And I do believe it was at that modeling point of my model that we truly began to see this. Now, moving on from the modeling is the influencing. Once we have this foundation in our transformation and the modeling, we can begin to influence people. Now, with the pastor, this process should already be in motion. We should already be developed leaders by the time we get here. But it's through our transformation and through our modeling that we can influence people to take a little deeper look at something like the book of Revelation, to go a little deeper with the sermons. And so this was also an important step here, the influencing, because I shared my influence with them, and they in turn were beginning to influence one another. And that was a neat thing to watch, as we'd see people begin to catch fire and take off a little faster than others, and you would see them looking back at their peers and the people next to them in the pews and starting up these conversations that were pushing along those who were kind of lagging. And so we see the influencing step taking place out here in the pews. Now, the final step of my model is shepherding. And for me, that is really discipling, that we are called to make disciples. And so as a pastor, this is an important step for me because of what the pastor that preceded me had said. They're resigned to get whoever they get, and they're going to live with it. That's not the way church should be. This is the house of God. This is the body of Christ. We shouldn't be relying on who's in the pulpit, and our emotions and our feelings about the church should not rise and fall with whether or not we have a good pastor or not. And so early on in this course, it hit me that a very important part of what I'm doing is preparing these churches. And they had caught fire and they were doing so well. And you kind of get tired of hearing it every Sunday. We hope you're not leaving anytime soon. And it really reinforced this idea that I got from the course. I really need to start preparing these churches for when I'm gone, so that it doesn't matter who comes in, that they're not going to be resigned to get whatever they get and live with it, that they can be vibrant, that they can continue ministry on their own. And so my shepherding here has been in creating shepherds out here in the pulpits. Now, or out here in the pews. An important part of that, it showed itself early on, and it was a matter of not only being myself, but also taking advantage of the blessings that we had here. And in these two churches, we just happen to have been blessed with several children. We have a huge population of children in these two churches. And so there was a need for children's ministry. Well, that played right to my strengths. Having come from Lexington at St. Luke United Methodist, I was very involved in children's ministry there. And so I had a background, and I had the know-how, and I had the training from a great teacher there at St. Luke. And so I was able to start building a curriculum and a program here that we called God's Garden Patch. Now, in the big scheme of things, perhaps this doesn't seem like a big deal in the leadership model, but it has proven to be an incredible and a very vital training ground, because we were able to pull people from out here in the pews back into God's Garden Patch on Sunday nights and to train them to be leaders, that they could take the inner transformation and the modeling and the influencing and put it into practice with children. Now, children are our most important resource, and they're also a great training ground for leaders because children are very forgiving. As long as children know that you love them and you're willing to have fun with them, they'll forgive our shortcomings as leaders as we learn to lead. And so one of my big things with God's Garden Patch in trying to head off this idea of burnout in the church, because so often in church it's the same people doing the same things over and over and over, one of my requirements for instituting this program was that during any given 8-week period, no two people or no one person would teach more than once. And so when we instituted this, this was huge for me. And In the time since, I think we've gone 12 weeks without the same person repeating themselves. And as a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to do it for my first time since September. And so we've done really well with that. And it was important because we have numbers back there in order to get back there and start developing leadership and seeing if we've read right. If there are people, that the people we've identified truly are ready to lead. But we've also been able to develop them, to encourage them, to help them along. And we've given them the freedom to develop their own lesson, to pick what they want to have on the PowerPoints and the verses they want to do in Bible drills and the songs that they want to sing. And so God's Garden Patch, yes, it's a children's ministry, but it's also been a very, very valuable training ground for leaders for this church. Now, a couple nights ago, from when I'm filming this, one of my proudest moments from my leadership initiative here in this church took place. And I was actually in class, or not in class, I wasn't on my computer in class. I was in the library over at Asbury, and I got an email from one of the women that's very involved in God's Garden Patch, and she just happens to be the principal at the grade school here. And she goes, "Sherry and I would like to meet with you. We have some things we'd like to discuss, ideas that we want to bounce off of you." And I was sitting there with my buddy, the same one that punched me in the arm about the church in Nineveh, and I just lit up. And I was like, things are happening. And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I showed him this simple little email, and he's like, "You're weird." And I'm like, "Well, we know these things." But when I got home and talked with them here at the church, they were just gushing. All these things that we have been trying to do here were coming to fruition, and it wasn't about children's ministry. They wanted to take what they had learned in children's ministry, the leadership tools, the ministry tools that they had developed, and they want to take them to the broader church. They want to redo the adult Sunday school, which frankly really needs to be redone, but since I'm preaching at the other church, I can't do it. But they've come to me and said, "We need to do this. We want to do this." And so this leadership model is coming into fruition, which makes me incredibly proud and incredibly happy. But to see this church blossom in this way, and to know that once we're gone from here, if I've accomplished anything, it's been that these people can do ministry on their own, that they can be leaders, that no matter who's in that pulpit over there, they are ready to do ministry, to be a church, no matter what happens. And as a pastor, I'm not sure I could ask for anything more for my congregation when we leave. Another important aspect of developing these leaders here was evidenced just a few weeks ago when I had my surgeries. In years past, if a pastor was unavailable on a Sunday at either one of these churches, one of three things would happen. They either wouldn't have church, they would try to get somebody from Gideon's to come in and preach, or they would show up and sing a couple hymns and take prayer requests and go home. With me out, and with the leadership that we've developed here, we were able to have our own people come out and prepare a sermon, to do the bulletins on their own, to pick the music, and to handle everything without me. All I had to do was to lay at home and heal, and to know that the churches were in good hands. And so that's another example of just how powerful the leadership model has been here, because we've had people pick up the ball and run with it, even when the pastor's unable or the pastor's out of commission, as I was there for a week or two. And so that has been a huge blessing.
The point is, you guys think about those kind of things. I mean, what would you do? What does God tell you to do in those kinds of situations? All right, one more. The obstacles in our path. In ancient times, a king had a boulder placed on a roadway. Then he hid himself and watched to see if anyone would remove the huge rock. Some of the king's wealthiest merchants came by and simply walked around it. Many loudly blamed the king for not keeping the roads clear, but none did anything about getting the stone out of the way. And then a peasant came along. Everybody know what a peasant is? It's a poor person. A peasant came along carrying a load of vegetables. Upon approaching the boulder, the peasant laid down his burden and tried to move the stone to the side of the road. After much pushing and straining, he finally succeeded. And after the peasant picked up his load of vegetables, he noticed a purse lying in the road where the boulder had been. The purse contained many gold coins and a note from the king, indicating that the gold was for the person who removed the boulder from the roadway. The peasant learned what many of us never understand. Every obstacle presents an opportunity to improve our condition.
So in conclusion, and I said this has been one of the most valuable courses that I've had in seminary. Being a former Marine, leadership is something that I've been trained in and well versed in, and something I was actually pretty good at when I had a flat top and didn't have this long, luxurious hair. And so this course, it actually challenged me to rethink some of the things that I brought out of the Marine Corps, and it also reinforced a lot of the things. And so I've taken these tools that we've had, developed my own leadership model, changed it even as we went along, and as I began to see that maybe there needed to be some tweaks here and there. And I think that I have the beginnings of this model that have proven just tremendously effective at both of these little churches by instituting the tools that we've learned throughout this course, and that has truly been a blessing. So for a little extra credit, our Advent posting or our posting for our devotional this week, I thought I'd show you that I wasn't joking. Hollywood quality elf costume, Christmas countdown. As of this moment, 15 days, 3 hours, and 28 minutes, and 14 seconds. Santa Claus in the school backpack in all of its glory with candy canes to hand out to the good students at school. See ya.